Okay, well, thank you very much. Good afternoon, everybody. I appreciate the nice introduction from Billy. He can read well, among his many other great attributes. And I am here. I've got a little over 45 minutes to talk to you all about workplace issues involving COVID. And let's first see if my slides are going to work. Yeah, it's been a wild ride for the past, hard to believe we're coming up on 19 months. My world is, as all of you, it's unprecedented, and there have been changes as recently as about 4 hours ago, if some of you all been checking the news at all. So I'm going to try and give you what I think are the key points you all need to know in terms of COVID-19 implications for your workplace and the latest and greatest hits. One thing I want to say, just as a general comment, and I say this, I do a lot of public speaking, I do a lot of management training. I'm talking to CFOs and CEOs and HR managers, and this is not, there's no blueprint for this. Things change. Sometimes things change by the week, by the hour. It's insane. And you just have to stay on an even keel and try and make the best business decisions you can, because there are not going to be set answers for a lot of these questions. And so it's a pandemic. You're always going to err on the side of health and safety of your workplace, and we're going to do the best we can. And that was true 19 months ago, and it's true today. All right, so what I wanted to do in terms of introducing this, just with a couple of, I really don't often go to the CDC site to look at data, but I did last night because I was just curious as I was looking through this, and I thought, this first slide won't surprise you. We as a nation are considered to be in a state of, high community risk, and so, that frames some of the things that we see from the Biden administration that I'm going to touch on in just a few minutes. So the next thing, I think, just in terms of framing this, we're doing better. We're getting there. Although I saw a headline today, we've got another surge in Germany, apparently. But if you look, and this is just for Virginia, it gives you a graph of how the cases have trended over time. And of course, again, this will help understand sort of what President Biden did in early September that I'm going to touch on in just a moment. But, you all know, we thought when the vaccines came out in the spring of this year, and the cases started going down, and we thought, hey, we're on the upswing here. And then, all of a sudden the Delta variant, and we had all of those, what came with that, and then the tension in the workplace and in society, where, we thought we were on the other side of this, and then we weren't, and the cases spiked again. And now they're trending down, and let's just hope it continues that way. But what a wild ride. So that brings me to our first polling question. According to CDC data, what percentage of persons aged 12 and over in the United States have had at least one dose of the COVID-19 vaccine? And Holly, I'm not sure how this works from here. Maybe I give it a moment before I go to the next slide, or do you take over here?
I launched the poll question. It should duplicate your slide. Everybody can give their thought on this one, their best guess. We'll give it a few seconds, and I'll let you know when we've got our votes in, and I'll close the poll, and then you can resume.
All right.
And I'll share the results, and I'll come back across the screen. Okay, so I'm going to close the poll and then I will share the results so we can see what we got. So looks like most everybody says 62%, and then 54% comes in second, and then third is 39, and then 78 is the last choice.
And lo and behold, 78 is the right answer. So most of y'all did not get the right answer. And here's the screenshot from the CDC. You know, this is at least one dose, 12 and over, 78%. You'll see the slide right above that, or the thing that 66% are fully vaccinated. So that's, you know, you can, depends on whether you're a glass half full or a person or not, you know, 2/3 of the United States are fully vaccinated, but that means 1 in 3 are not. So then, you know, you think about, okay, so what is the policy decisions that come out of that? And so we have September 9th, which was a pretty significant rollout by the federal government. President Biden had a press conference, and you'll remember, again, back to the summer and in August, when we were trending up again with cases. We had the Delta variant, and you know, we've been as a society trying to educate employees and educate persons about the vaccine, and that's the way to go to control this. You know, President Biden determined, well, we need to step things up. So what he did on September 9th is he launched what he called his Path Out of the Pandemic program. And there were a number of things that came out of that. So the first thing, let me get my screen here. I've got a weird screen situation where I'm having to look up. So that's why you'll see me looking up, and I went too far. Let's see. Yeah, so the path out of the pandemic, you know, there were two significant strategies that I want to talk about a little bit that really impact the workplace. The first one was this executive order 14042, which took immediate effect. There were some dates that I'll touch on in a moment, but essentially the president issued this executive order which required vaccinations for federal employees and employees of federal contractors. The second big picture item was that he directed OSHA, the federal agency that oversees health and safety, to issue an emergency temporary standard which would mandate vaccines or weekly testing for employers with over 100 employees. Now, how ironic, you know, I'm burning the midnight oil, putting the final touches on this PowerPoint last night. And as of that point, the OSHA had not issued the emergency temporary standard. But lo and behold, they were published this morning. 490 pages worth of paper, you know, lots of preamble, lots of legalese, but and then the White House and OSHA have put out a number of more reader-friendly, you know, summaries and fact sheets. So you're going to be hearing a lot about that over the next few days and weeks. And I'm going to give you some highlights I have been able to digest, and so we'll talk about that in a few minutes. All right, but first let's talk about the executive order. I don't know how many of you all are federal contractors or federal covered subcontractors. If you are, you're probably well aware of this executive order. If you're not, you may have, you know, heard of something about it in passing. But let me just give, to the extent that some of you may be subject to them. Let me give you a few of the current lay of the land from my perspective. In very generally stated, that this executive order requires a clause in covered contracts mandating that federal contractors and subcontractors comply with guidance that would be published by a task force, a White House task force. That task force did, in fact, issue guidance on September 24th, and I'll touch on those in a moment. But the other thing to know is if you are subject to a federal contract, it's not something. There was a sliding scale based on when the date, and you'll see the dates laid out in this last bullet point here. So let me go to the next slide. So the task force did come out with their guidance on September 24th. As part of that, the first big important date is that they noted that covered employees must be fully vaccinated by December 8th. And there was some this continues to be a source of much confusion and controversy. So one of the things the task force did in terms of who would be covered is that they noted that it would cover any employee working on or in connection with a government contractor. So this could include folks who are working remotely, who never go on at the work site because they're connected to the federal contract. It also includes folks working in areas such as human resources, payroll, billing, IT, because they are considered to be in connection with the contract. And there's lots of, well, what if you just only have a very small part of your duties dealing with the federal contract, but most of your other work is on regular commercial deals, in the private sector. So we don't have great guidance, or it's not really fleshed out. As I noted, lots of unanswered questions, but that's where we are. Under this executive order, the business has to identify a person who is responsible for coordinating and monitoring compliance. And unlike the other mandate that I'm going to talk about in a moment, there's no test out exception. You're either vaccinated or you have an exemption of a religious or a medical exemption. And I'll touch on that in a moment, but there's no test out option with that. All right. Just talking a little bit more about the task force guidance. It applies to employees at all workplace locations where a covered employee is likely to be present. Contractors, you're responsible for determining the vaccination status of your employees. Unlike some of the other suggestions from the CDC or even the Virginia permanent standard that I'm going to touch on for Virginia employers in a moment, an employee's self-attestation is not sufficient. So if you just say to your employer you vaccinated and you certify that's yes, under the executive order, you're actually required to review the document or confirming information from a healthcare provider. There are exemptions, just like with all of these guidelines and rules dealing with medical or religious exemptions. I will say a little bit more about that in a few minutes. If the contractor has an employee who seeks an exemption, and it's deemed to be valid, then the question is, how do you accommodate that exemption? And in that case, you will likely need to bring, especially if that person's working at a federal work site, to bring the agency into the decision about what the accommodation might be, whether the person can in fact continue to work at the site with masks and physical distancing, and that'll be part of it's a case-by-case determination. So here we thought, you know, that something was going to be hot off the press because it. Oh, I got one more slide here. So let's see. Yeah, so part of this federal executive order also requires compliance with CDC guidance, things like masking and physical distancing for the employees at the work site. It also provides that the executive order supersedes any state laws, any conflicting state or local federal laws. But conversely, if a state has a more restrictive requirement or a more, you know, another obligation that exceeds the federal, that the state would apply in that circumstance. So, you know, we had this guidance from September 24th. You had a lot of folks who were trying to grapple with it. And then one of the things that the task force heard, the fact that there were all these questions and a lot of confusion. So on Monday, they issued updated frequently asked questions. And one of the things that they did was that they noted that this December 8th deadline was really not a true deadline. It was not a cliff, as one of the federal officials noted. That an employer, as long as they showed good faith, that they were trying to work with their employees, that deadline was not a hard and fast one. Similarly, if somebody was requesting an accommodation and they hadn't quite gotten all the information they needed and that was still in process, that person that December 8th was not a drop dead deadline for that evaluation as well. And they also gave some further guidance and a little bit of comfort to employers that if they had an employee who determined that he or she was not going to get vaccinated, and you know every workplace has that, then the employer that could follow its personnel policies, and if that meant disciplinary action or an unpaid leave or even termination, that a company could follow its disciplinary processes. By the way, I do probably here as good a time as any to also note that as we move through the summer, and you know, right around the time where the federal government decided, you know what, we need to step this up, we're going to issue these mandates. There were many private employers who were also evaluating whether to mandate the vaccine. And I've had clients in a number of industries. You know, most haven't, in my experience. Some have. And the trick has always been that the real Achilles heel for a company has been, okay, you have a legal right, and there have been challenges, but I will say that in my judgment, most of the courts have gotten it right and have opined that companies have a legal right to mandate that their employees be vaccinated. But then the question is, should you? And what do you do for the 20% of your workforce or whatever it is, depending on your industry or your geography, that says, no, I'm not going to do it for a variety of reasons. are you prepared, especially in a hiring crunch where you're desperately trying, in many industries, you don't have sufficient workers. Are you prepared to terminate 20% of your workforce? And I had a client yesterday that I've been counseling and working with, and who imposed a mandate, made that business decision, and they had a date of October 31, last Friday. And they had a workforce of about 400 employees, and they had about 30 employees who chose not to comply. And so, they absorbed that. They could, but the question about, would you as a business voluntarily choose to impose a mandate, comes with lots of practical and real life questions beyond just the legal status. All right, so let's make sure I'm staying on task here. Let's see, what do we got next? Yeah, so lo and behold, we're anticipating this OSHA standard for those employers 100 or more employees. And I've got my clever little slide. You see my bullet point 3 there. As of yesterday, the publication was said to be imminent, and lo and behold, we're here. They've now been issued. So let's talk about some of the requirements of that. But before I do that, let me also just give you my sort of 30,000 foot view. Will these this guidance has now been issued? It's called an emergency temporary standard. And OSHA has put out all sorts of press releases. As I mentioned, the actual standard, there's 490 pages on the website. Once it's officially published in the Federal Register, they use smaller print, so it'll be fewer pages, but the substance will be the same. With the two big takeaways, the two big dates to know is that employers essentially have 30 days to come into compliance, which falls on December 5th, and that employees need to be fully vaccinated by January 4th. So essentially it's 60 days out. All right, so before I get into some of the particulars, let me also tell you that the legality of this emergency temporary standard is going to be heavily litigated in the next few weeks. There will be lawsuits filed, and states' attorneys general are going to file lawsuits. There are going to be business groups, they're going to file lawsuits. And so just so you have a little bit of understanding about that piece of it. One of the hurdles that OSHA is going to need to overcome is whether the emergency temporary standard is necessary to address a grave danger in the workplace. And it's also, let me note that these are, this is an emergency rule that didn't go through the normal public notice and comment process. So a judge is already going to look at that with some skepticism. You might remember Anthony Scalia, the famed Supreme Court justice who passed away a few years ago. His son actually served as the Department of Labor under President Trump. He wrote a very interesting editorial in the Washington Post when a few weeks ago, noting that this OSHA standard was on sort of shaky legal ground from his perspective. One of the things that will be argued is, if it's such a grave danger, why does it only apply to employees with 100 or more employees? Why not everybody? You know, I was reading what OSHA published today, reading some of it, and they've already, you know, they've anticipated that, and they've tried to articulate why they think that they've got that, that they view this as a step-by-step approach, and they think that larger employers will be in a better position to absorb these changes. But they're so it's going to be in a few weeks. We will know whether a court is going to stay or enjoin or block that emergency temporary standard. But I am not recommending that you all hope for that outcome and that you all sit on the sidelines and think, well, we're not going to have to do anything on this because it may be blocked. I think that's not prudent advice that I would give to you all. You know, again, when I had this slide last night, you know, I had so many unanswered questions. Well, let me give you some answers. We do have some answers. So this is not on the slide. Hopefully you all are good note takers. So let me give you what I think are sort of the key points to know on this new standard. Of course, you know, just the general point, just to make sure, is it's going to mandate vaccines or weekly testing for companies with 100 or more employees. The date to comply with the vaccination is January 4. But here's what needs to happen by December 5, and there are several really key points to know. The first is a company needs to have its compliance program and policy in place. And it's going to deal with a lot of the things. Those of you who are in Virginia have a leg up because presumably you have a COVID policy in compliance with the Virginia standard. Things like return to work and, you know, how somebody reports that they're experiencing symptoms. You know, some of these things where you all hopefully have good protocols already in place now needs to be memorialized in a policy. Another key provision of this new standard is employers are required to provide paid time off so that a person can get vaccinated. So, you know, if they're not, again, the government's trying to impose incentives to get folks vaccinated. And so as part of that, there's going to be paid time off. Also, if a person is if they get vaccinated and they experience symptoms that they're sick for a day or two, you're required to provide the paid time off during that time as well. By December 5th, you're required to mandate and have as your policies that unvaccinated employees will wear masks while working, and you're going to need to determine the vaccination status of your employees. One of the things another really important point, but I'm going to put an asterisk by it. You see my third bullet point on the slide? In fact, they did, and I would probably reframe how I've worded this. Instead of saying unvaccinated employees will be required to pay, what the standard says is that the employer is not required to pay for the weekly tests. So let's say somebody is unvaccinated, but under this standard, they can remain in the workplace as long as you have all the other protocols, and they agree to weekly testing. One of the key questions is, well, who pays for it? And what the OSHA said is that an employer is not required to pay for it. Now, you may still decide to, but you're not required to. But an interesting question, and I don't know the answer to this yet, is in Virginia, a employer cannot require an employee to pay for a test. So that's still, to me, that's still a little bit in play. My gut tells me that the Virginia law, because you even though the federal preempts, if there's a state provision that's a little bit more restrictive, I think you would defer to the state. So my gut tells me that won't apply in Virginia, and employers will likely still have to pay for the testing. At least one piece of good news, that when this, over the last few weeks, we've all been, at least I have as a management business lawyer, kind of on pins and needles. Is this thing going to take immediate effect? And business groups, knowing this was coming, knowing this was imminent, has been lobbying behind the scenes. Can you at least let us get through the holidays? And so at least we've got 30 days for most of these provisions, and we have until January on the vaccine. So at least it's not taking, immediate effect. All right, polling question 2. I'm going to shift gears because I've got a lot to cover in my next 15 minutes. Polling question 2. It is a violation of HIPAA for an employer to require that an employee disclose whether or not he has been vaccinated for COVID-19. True or false?
Okay, I launched the polling question. So if you all will just place your answer, click the button of your choice.
Hey, Todd.
Yes.
You actually have, you're fine to go a little longer. We do have a break built in for CPE hours, but I figure since everybody's going virtually that they're taking breaks as needed. So I know you have a lot to cover and don't want to rush you, so you're fine at 2:55.
Okay, well, I know people were all counting for their coffee break between, I think they've been riveted. I don't think they've moved out of their seat since 1 o'clock, Billy.
Well, if you get done, you go for it. I just wanted to give you a little more time. You
No,
have a whole new 495 pages to read today. So.
That's right. No, thanks. Good to know. All right, so how are we doing on the polling?
Okay, so we have true 29% and false 71%. And Todd, I'm going to ask you a question real quick. A question came through you may want to answer while we're here, is where can I find the Virginia law on COVID policies?
Yeah, so I have a slide on that and a couple of them, but Virginia Department of Labor and Industry, that I affectionately refer to as DOLI, D-O-L-I, that is the agency that publishes the Virginia Permanent Standard. So you would go to their website and you would see right on their homepage a link on their permanent standard. All right, so the answer to the question is false. Most of you got that right. I get this question enough that I wanted to make it a sort of a poll question. And there's tremendous confusion about HIPAA. People always say HIPAA, HIPAA. HIPAA really has almost no applicability outside of the healthcare system. What the law you really need to know about here is the Americans with Disabilities Act. And that does have some provisions for keeping medical information confidential. And but in our COVID times, asking somebody whether they are vaccinated from COVID-19 is an exception. So an employer is permitted, and now with this mandate is going to be also required to ask about a vaccination status. They're not asking about your health history. They're not asking, they're not going beyond that, but they can ask about whether or not you're vaccinated, and they can require you to show proof about that. All right. So that gives me a segue. I want to touch on this for those of you who have already gone down this road, or who then may be going down this road with religious exemptions. to there are always been, and there's lots of confusion about this as well. That there are medical and religious exemptions to if an employer or the government were to impose a vaccine mandate. And so, and you know, we've gone through this over the months, and there's been the whole carrot and stick thing, and a lot of employers were offering all sort of incentives to employees to become vaccinated. Then on the flip side, you might remember Delta Airlines is one of the first to come forward and say, you know what, if you don't get vaccinated, we're actually, your healthcare premiums are going to be $200 a month more than vaccinated employees. They have the legal right to do that. So, you know, you had all this, and then Delta would say, guess what? When we announced that, we had a number of folks who got vaccinated because this was going to hit their pocketbook. So one of the things that has also happened is the federal EEOC has implemented some really helpful guidance over the last few months, dealing with a lot of these questions that we had never dealt with before. I mean, the concept of a religious accommodation was, you know, that came up, those were few and far between. You know, you might have somebody who was asked to work on the Sabbath who didn't want to for a religious reason, or, you know, it was, but now all of a sudden this is front and center. And you think this is not maybe your industry. I know there is a university person on here, but think about the colleges, or if you have children who are in college and your college mandated that employees or students had to be vaccinated. You know, there was lots of consternation about that, and lots of questions about, okay, well, what about a religious exemption? And there's been a lot written about that process being abused, and all of a sudden, people finding religion and it not being sincere. So let's make sure we talk about what the law is and how this plays out. And let me just set this up again, but let me make sure I'm staying to my slide here, and then I'm getting ahead of myself. So the EEOC issued guidance a couple weeks ago, October 25th, revised guidance. And they have this new, you know, if you go to the EEOC's website, you know, there'll be, just like a lot of these now, there'll be a link right to get to their COVID resources. And there'll be a link right to get to their latest news and their latest updates. And so they've added what to their existing guidance, this new section L, which focuses on religious objections to a vaccine mandate and how an employer will analyze that. So what the law says on, by the way, the medical exemptions are much easier. You know, if a doctor certifies and you that the person can't be vaccinated, you know, then the presumption is that that's valid, and then you're going to work about whether and how to accommodate. The religious one is the one that's been more elusive, and frankly, from my perspective, has been subject to some abuse, where people have said no for reasons not relating to religion, and then when all of a sudden they're put to the test, they find something on the internet and slap their name on it and contend that they have a religious objection. I'm not saying that people don't have valid ones, but what we do know and what we have now from the EEOC is some helpful guidance in terms of how you analyze that. So the first part, there's a two-pronged test to that. The first is the employee has to assert that he or she has a sincerely held religious belief, which makes them unable to be vaccinated. This new EEOC guidance goes into a fair amount of detail about how an employer can analyze whether it's a sincerely held religious belief, and questions that they can ask if they've got some basis for thinking this may not be legitimate. So then the next question becomes, if the employee meets that threshold, then the question is, can and how can you accommodate it? So let me get to my next slide here. Let's see, get my cursor up here. Sorry for looking up at you all. Not getting there. All right. Holly, I'm having an issue. Can you put my slide, can you move my next slide forward?
Do you see a button where you can give me keyboard and mouse control?
All right, let me go to plan B. There, let's get my cursor there. All right. Bear with me for just a minute.
You may have to actually click. Okay, something moved.
All right, hold on for just a second. What have I done? Okay, I've got my trusty person coming in. All right. Yeah, I think somehow I found it. So here's my next slide. Can you all see my slide okay?
We've got the updated EEOC guidance on religious exemption requests and responses.
Yeah, okay. Now I want to move to my next slide. So let's see how I get there. Why am I not able to get there? I'm trying to get my cursor up there. Say hello to Amani. Oh, she did it right there. All right, all right. Sorry about that. Best made plans. I've been trying to master this technology for 19 months now, and it's like there's never been a perfect wedding. All right. So the accommodation piece is interesting. The EEOC suggests that you try and work with the employee, and maybe you allow him or her to telework if that's feasible, or to reassign that person if feasible. You're not required to. So then the question becomes, if the accommodation would pose an undue hardship, and under a religious exemption, it's actually a different test than under a medical exemption. The employer has more leeway. And here's what the new EEOC guidance gives employers some more cover, where it talks about the fact that the burden can be more than just a cost. If you are exposing your employees to a higher risk of spread of COVID-19, then that could be a legitimate reason to deny the accommodation. So it may be that that person has to go on an unpaid leave, or even face disciplinary action. So just be mindful that that's something that there's been a lot of discussion and a lot of guidance on that, and now we have some updated information from the EEOC that's really helpful. All right, let me touch on, I'm going to talk about Virginia and Tennessee, and then we've got a third polling question. Those of you in Virginia, I hope, are well aware that Virginia's permanent standard was updated and effective September 8th. You know, Virginia, you all have seen the election results and the fact that it was a sea change. The Democrats in Virginia were firmly in control of all chambers, and we're pretty aggressive in terms of many things, including COVID-19. So, you know, last summer, we were the first state to enact COVID-19 emergency temporary standard. and all sorts of things, and risk assessments and infectious disease plans and lots of things. Well, then that carried over, was reissued in January, and now we have the permanent standard. There were some common sense, helpful things that came out of that, such as noting that employers, if they were following CDC guidance, that was deemed to be compliance with the Virginia standard. But there are some things that that caught some folks off guard. You remember my first slide talking about how we're in an area of substantial transmission. The whole country is. Well, because that's the case, the even vaccinated employees, if they're working indoors, either vaccinated or unvaccinated, need to wear a mask unless they are alone in a room or actively eating or drinking and have at least 6 feet of space. That was a curveball. There are a lot of businesses who thought, wait a minute, we've gotten through this, we've been vaccinated. Are you telling us now we have to go back to wearing masks? And the short answer is yes. We've had to do that at Gentry Locke. A lot of your all businesses hopefully have done the same. One of the things that's been super confusing, though, remember I told you that President Biden made his big pronouncement, the big path out of the pandemic. That occurred on September 9th. Virginia, even though all of their other proclamations on executive orders and earlier versions of the standard, they issued press releases and they were very proactive in terms of getting that word out. When they updated their standard on September 8th, which was the day before, it was crickets. I mean, they did it, they just posted something without any real press releases or fanfares. So a lot of employers missed it. And so just to the extent that you are in Virginia, hopefully you are well aware by now that we do have this permanent standard in effect. It requires, there's some new components to that. For example, it requires a policy that has a mechanism for to allow anonymous complaints. I've told you about the mask requirement, and then of course there are lots of return to work requirements, and when you have to notify a federal agency, depending on if you've got 2 cases in your workplace. I mean, all of those are part of the standard as well. By the way, a number of those concepts that are part of the Virginia standard are going to be part of this OSHA standard for employers with 100 or more employees. The return to work, the providing education to your employees about COVID-19 and vaccines. I mean, all of that's going to be part of it is part of the OSHA standard as well. Last thing, well, two other quick points I'll make on Virginia. One of the things they did with this new standard, they did away with this concept of very high risk, medium risk, low risk assessments, and they just now have one standard, which is called a higher risk workplace. My sense is that most of you on this call would not fall into a higher risk workplace. There is some, if you're in a, high retail, manufacturing, depending on how close together your employees are, some industries would be considered higher risk. In that case, they do have some enhanced obligations. But if not, then hopefully you've got your policy in place and you're home free. The other thing to say about Virginia standard is they do draw distinctions between vaccinated and unvaccinated in certain ways in terms of how people can, you know, congregate in break rooms and whether they have to wear a mask or not are part of the Virginia standard. All right. So lo and behold, just to make sure, you know, we didn't have a life outside of the law, you know, Billy tells me, hey, we got some Tennessee folks on this call. And so, you know, on an initial, when I got my first draft of the PowerPoint, and I learned, well, really, Tennessee doesn't have anything in place. And then lo and behold, over the weekend, the Tennessee legislature had been working hard, and they came up with their own COVID bill, which was dramatically different. And those of you who are in Tennessee, you've probably seen the headlines over the last couple of days. You know, and this is not law. Right now, the governor, who at least as of yesterday had not announced what he was going to do with this bill, but essentially it provides a whole lot of discretion and leeway to businesses to say, and to employees, to basically say, you can't require proof of a vaccine to enter a workplace or an entertainment venue, for example. You as an employer can't impose a mandate. It tries to say that even, you know, that there's like a states' rights issue, that, you know, that that Tennessee is not going to be subject to any type of federal mandate. And so for the federal contractors, for example, we talked about the executive order. There's a provision in the bill which says a federal contractor can seek an exemption from the federal mandate. Very controversial. You know, this just shows you how each state kind of views things differently, and maybe that's the beauty of our republic. Ironically, I have a daughter who lives in Nashville, and I was talking to her on the phone yesterday, and you know, one of the pushbacks is, you know, Nashville, for example, it is based a lot on tourism and entertainment and all of these. You know, if you're a national recording artist and you're going around the country performing in venues where proof of vaccination is required, are you going to play in Tennessee where your audience, you know, you have no control over whether they're vaccinated or not? So if you're in Tennessee, this is probably already on your radar, but just be mindful that there are going to be some, you know, we're going to have to see if the law is challenged, if the bills are modified, but that's, you know, in real time, the governor has 10 days to decide. If he doesn't decide within 10 days, it takes effect, and it's supposed to take effect immediately. So really be interesting to see what happens with that in Tennessee. All right, so that brings us to our last little fun polling question. I'll let you all read it, and then we'll open the poll, and then we'll conclude my talk unless there are questions.
Okay, if everybody can read the question off the slide first, and then I'll post the polling question. I had to format it a little bit different to put in our polling question. So just read the information on the slide. I'll give you just a few seconds to do that, and then I'll throw up the poll. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and launch the poll, and it does ask the basic question here. And while I've got the poll question up, we do have a question that's come through, Todd. It's, will Tuesday's election results have any impact on these COVID OSHA discussions we are having? Just asking your opinion if you're willing to give it.
Yeah, so it won't have any implication on the national, OSHA has now come forward with these emergency temporary standard. In Virginia, I don't see any immediate changes to the permanent standard, but there's no question it's a new day in Virginia as it pertains to politics. It is a much brighter picture for Virginia employers than it has been for the last couple of years. So pretty dramatic. All right, so my poll question, are we ready for that?
Yeah, so we got 76% false and 24% true.
Yeah, so there is going to be a legal risk here. And I actually got this question from a client who wanted to move his, I mean, almost verbatim. And, you know, don't be too clever here. You're not going to be able to just run to another state and think, well, haha, we're not subject to these rules. You know, stay on an even keel with this. We'll get there. I know businesses get frustrated, and especially those who have unvaccinated employees, and they think, well, you know, it's just stay on an even keel, make time for yourselves. We're 19 months into this. We're still going to deal with it. Lots of employment issues come up. And as you can see, they change sometimes by the day, by the hour. And so just do the best you can. Last shout out to my associate Amani Soul, who helped me not just technically a little while ago, but helped put together these materials for me. So thank you to Amani. Billy, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much. We sincerely appreciate your time, and I know it's we were busy during COVID with PPP and employee retention credit, et cetera, but I suspect your billable hours have increased pretty considerably over the last couple of years. So I know you're needed, and we appreciate the support that you provide, and to our firm as well. So we sincerely appreciate that.